And hello YouTube, this is Thomas Judge back once again with another YouTube reading guide series. Today is the third in a 14 video series, walking through the correct reading order of Superman by DC Comics. To create this reading guide, I've read the 1677 comic single issues that comprise the shared Superman universe from 1991 all the way through to 2011. That includes all spin-offs, tie-ins, and events, and I've used that knowledge to build this guide, the internet's most detailed reading guide for the world's most famous superhero. At this point, you'll hopefully be aware that the guide takes the form of a Google Sheet that I've split into 14 tabs, representing the 14 discrete chunks I've split this period of Superman reading into. This can be viewed for free on my website, and generally each era or chunk or tab can be separated by a major DC event that I'm also going to be releasing a separate video on. This playlist is going to contain every single Superman video and every DC event video in chronological order. However, if you're only interested in the DC events by themselves, they're also collected in a dedicated 11 video playlist that's available separately on the channel. I will say, please do watch the introductory video and the various things that it refers to in that. The introduction video not only explains why I'm starting in 1991 with my reading guide, it also explains briefly various terms that I talk about, like Type P reader, Type J reader, explicit story arcs, implicit story arcs, and so on. Well, with no further ado, here is the third era of my Superman reading order, and this is what we're going to be talking about today. So last time we covered the 0 hour DC event in a dedicated video, but before that we'd covered the second era of Superman, which was November 1993 through to September 1994. And those are the issues directly from the Death and Return of Superman up to the 0 hour event. Today what we're going to be doing is looking at the 70 issues that cover from October 1994 to January 1996. So from 0 hour all the way up to the Underworld Unleashed DC event. Now, as we go through this, please do remember, just go through it one line at a time. So we're going to be starting off, for example, on this line here, line 3, and we're just going to be moving through bit by bit, piece by piece as we go. Now, that should hopefully make it very clear and very simple to read along with me. But what I'm going to do as well is every time that I go through a particular story arc, I'm also going to check in on what triangle number is on a particular cover. So if you're not familiar with what triangle numbers are, then please do watch that introductory video. Finally, you'll notice here there's now a fifth column, Superman Man of Tomorrow. We'll talk about that when that becomes relevant in just a moment. So with no further ado, the very first story arc we have here is Peer Pressure, also known as Zero Month. So the peer pressure story arc is one that comes straight out of 0 hour. Every single issue in it is zero. Is a zero issue. So the sequence to read this in is Man of Steel issue 0, Superman issue 0, Adventures of Superman issue 0, and Action Comics issue 0. I know that sounds confusing. Thankfully, the triangle numbering comes to our benefit here. Man of Steel is triangle number 37, Superman is triangle number 38, Adventures of Superman is triangle number 39, and the very last one, Action Comics, is triangle number 40. What's worth noting here is that all 4 issues are one explicit story arc. Annoyingly, it's not actually marked as such on the cover, but it is an explicit story arc. And the minute you open the front page of it, the first one says Peer Pressure Part 1, the second one says Peer Pressure Part 2, and so on. That's why I've gone for the title Peer Pressure. And it introduces a villain called Conduit. Please note that sometimes this is referred to as the Conduit Saga, which makes very little sense to me given that all the internal issues have internal titles of Peer Pressure Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and Part 4. So that seems a bit random. This last issue, Action Comic 0, ends on sort of not quite a cliffhanger, but it leads directly into the next explicit arc, which is Dead Again, as you can see here. Dead Again is quite a chunky arc. Let's just talk through the issues that are relevant here. We have Man of Steel 38, Superman 94, Adventure of Superman 517, Action Comics 704, Man of Steel 39, Superman 95. Then we have Adventure of Superman 518. I will point out for a second that this particular issue, issue 518, has the aforementioned reference to the events of Hunter Prey that we talked about at the end of our last Superman video. Continuing on is Action Comics 705, which is the first appearance of someone called Ramsey Murdoch, who later becomes known as Savior. So if you're collecting first appearances, here is one. Then there's Man of Steel 40, Superman 96, and Adventures of Superman 519. Let's do a quick triangle check. 519 is triangle number 3. The reason for that is Man of Steel 40 is triangle number 1. That's where the triangle numbers reset to start a new calendar year. Overall, Dead Again is a long, tedious arc that has a central mystery of, is Superman real or is he fake? That is basically quite dull, to be honest. Anyway, moving on, what we then have are some connective issues. So these start straight away with Action Comics 706. Note that this issue has a cover branded as a Supergirl issue. I'll show it to you here. But other than that, it is Action Comics 706. It is part of the Superman run. It's a totally standard part of this run, and it's triangle number 4, so don't worry about that. Moving on, we have Man of Steel 41. You'll notice here that the cover specifically has the branding written on it, Love Bites Part 1, which makes it seem like it's an immediate crossover or an immediate kind of story arc. That's not the case. Ignore that. Absolutely ignore that. Next up, we have Superman 97. Then we have Adventures of Superman 520, and then Action Comics 707. And then we have Man of Steel 42. Now this, again, has the branding of this mini story called Love Bites, and it says Love Bites Part 2. But again, it's not a direct sequel. It's not a case that you need to read issue 41 of this and then 42 of that in that direct sequence. No, read it in the order that I've just said. So that cover branding doesn't matter. Just keep on following the triangle numbers. Then you have Superman 98, and then you have Adventures of Superman 521. Just checking in, that is triangle number 11. Next up, there is a 2-issue mini arc. I put it in square brackets here because it's kind of an implicit arc, but it's very clearly linked together. The first one is Action Comics 708, which ends on a major cliffhanger that gets resolved in Man of Steel number 43. So those are triangle numbers 12 and triangle number 13 respectively. That then leads into some more generic kind of connective issues. We start off with Superman 99. That then leads into Adventure of Superman 522. I'm not going to complain too much about this, but I will point out this issue is just dumb. Do you remember in the last video there was the fall of Metropolis, where Metropolis basically ends up getting largely destroyed, a lot like what happens to Gotham during No Man's Land? Well, in this issue, I can't believe I'm about to say this. Long story short, someone uses a magic spell to rebuild all of Metropolis within a couple of pages, resetting the entire status quo. Yes, literally a magic spell. It's just so lazy. Like, what? They couldn't do this for Gotham, or they didn't fancy doing a No Man's Land style arc here. It just seems daft. Anyway, the next connective issue is Action Comics 709. This features Guy Gardner, and actually it ties into the events of the ongoing Guy Gardner Warrior series, which is being published at the same time. But don't worry, it makes perfect sense without reading that. And then we have Man of Steel number 44. Let's have a quick check-in. This is triangle number 17. There we go. And you'll also note that this, when you read it, you'll note that this actually brings together a lot of long-running threads involving villains on the loose and all sorts of bits and pieces about mysterious threatening notes and so on. And it all leads into the next big story arc, which is the death of Clark Kent. That starts off with Superman issue 100, which is a huge double-sized issue. Now, it's worth noting that all the issues in this particular 8-issue explicit arc have Clark Kent's broken glasses lying across the Superman logo on the cover, apart from the very first and very last issue. Also, note that the cover design for issue 100 was thematically linked to that month's issues of JLA, Flash, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern. And I'm going to show you all those on the screen here, but it's just interesting to see that it's they were kind of running a whole DC-wide theme here. So Superman 100 does not end on a cliffhanger, but the next issue, Adventures of Superman 523, starts in the middle of a battle. So when I was reading this, I got very confused. I thought I'd missed something somehow. Don't get confused. You haven't missed anything, and everything will become clear during the course of the issue. Next up, we have Action Comics 710, Man of Steel 45, Superman 101, Adventures of Superman 524, Action Comics 711, and Man of Steel issue 46. Quick check on the triangle numbers, that's triangle number 25. Okay, and then next up we've got some connective issues. We've got quite a lot of connective issues, in fact. So let's start at the top here. The first connective issue to look at is Superman 102. Now, this issue features Captain Marvel, also known as Shazam, of course, and the story touched on here continues on in the Captain Marvel ongoing series at the time. There is, however, no need for us to follow it, as its impact on Clark is very self-contained. Next, we have Adventures of Superman 525. Next, and I'll just tab on over, we have Man of Tomorrow, issue 1. A new ongoing series begins. It's worth me possibly just kind of explaining what's going on here and why they released a 5th series. Yes, I know there are 4 ongoing monthly Superman series, and what that means is every single Wednesday you can rush to your comic shop, you can pick up a new issue of Superman. One week is Action Comics, the next week is Man of Steel, the next week is Superman, and the next week is Adventures of Superman, and then you just go round again and again. However, if you're familiar with how calendars work, I guess, you'll be aware that every now and again you get a month that has 5 Wednesdays in that month. And what that means in comic publishing, especially back in the 90s, is it meant that that would mean one of the Wednesdays within a month, the 5th and last Wednesday of a 5 Wednesday month, actually would have no Superman comic coming out. Other comics might come out, but there wouldn't be a Superman comic. And for DC, this was unacceptable. As a result, what they decided to do was to launch a series dedicated to this, which is Superman Man of Tomorrow. And this series would only release on those months where there were 5 Wednesdays, and so they had a gap to do a 5th Superman issue. That's why Man of Tomorrow is not a regular monthly thing. We will see it pretty sporadically, but I just want you, the viewer, to know that's where it comes from and that's why it exists. That said, Man of Tomorrow issue 1, the start of this series, starts with a bang as it brings back Lex Luthor. Anyway, after that, we've got Action Comics 712. Then we've got Man of Steel issue 47, which is a really interesting issue about fighting the Aryan Brotherhood. Then we have Superman 103. Then we have Adventures of Superman 526, which is yet another issue about Bloodsport, the antagonist that's been mentioned several times over the last couple of videos. Then we have Action Comics 713, Man of Steel 48. Now, Man of Steel 48 is actually really interesting because it refers to events that happened in the Man of Steel 1994 annual and also the Aquaman 1994 annual, both of which are part of the DC Year 1 annual event. As I mentioned several times, I've done a playlist of that on my channel as well. You don't need to read the Year 1 annuals or the Year 1 event to understand this, but if you're a completionist, maybe you'll find that interesting. It's also worth noting that Man of Steel 48 also introduces the character of Cosnor, who we're going to see again in Man of Steel 106 in just a few months' time. Anyway, the next issue is Superman 104. I will point out that Superman 104 actually reintroduces Cyborg Superman and explains what happened to him and what his fate was after the events of the Hunter Prey miniseries. So this is one of the reasons why I located the Hunter Prey miniseries where I did last time we had one of these videos, because I put it just before 0 hour. Next up, we have Adventures of Superman 527, which is triangle number 36. Now, this issue brings the Alpha Centaurian, who we were introduced to in a random one-off issue during 0 hour, into mainstream DC and modern-day Metropolis. Probably worth just talking about Alpha Centaurian for just a moment. Alpha Centaurian first appeared during 0 hour as a protector of Metropolis from another alternate timeline where Superman didn't exist. They met in the Adventures of Superman 516, where they briefly teamed up. This was in 0 hour. The original Centurion's timeline was erased from history during 0 hour, and the Centurion that appears in this issue is not the one that Superman's already met, but the Centurion of the regular timeline meeting Superman for the first time. Probably worth remembering that in the alternate timeline, Alpha Centaurian actually dated Lois Lane, which adds a little bit of animosity to his relationship with Superman. Anyway, enough of that. Issue 527 of Adventures of Superman ends with the arrival of Joker in town, which leads directly to the next issue, which is issue 714 of Action Comics. This is a totally standard Joker story. Unlike the implications on the cover, he does not get powers, he does not become super strong or anything, and he does not fight Superman. Continuing on with these slightly random connective issues, we have Man of Steel 49. This is a self-contained story about a villain in the sewers. Then we have Superman 105. This is a self-contained story that is actually split with Superman and Green Lantern. Then we have Adventures of Superman 528. I'll be honest, this is one of the oddest issues I've ever read in my entire life. It's all about an alien coming to Earth and attacking Superman, but it's written entirely from the alien's point of view, and the alien can't speak, and the alien is deaf. Random. So after that issue, after Adventures of Superman 528, we then have another Man of Tomorrow issue. So this is Man of Tomorrow number 2. This is mainly about Lex and culminates in Lex releasing the Parasite. The reason it's key to read that is that the next issue, Action Comics 715, which you will note here is Triangle 42, that starts off with Parasite on the loose. The issue ends on a cliffhanger, meaning that whilst this is an implicit arc, it confusingly goes straight into the next explicit arc, which is very heavily thematically branded as Trial of Superman. I've got some notes here. So again, it's worth always noting what the notes on the cell say. Here it goes. Several issues during this arc overlap with the universe-wide DC event Underworld Unleashed. Separate video for that is available. But we're looking at it here, so let's have a look at this relatively lengthy Trial of Superman arc. So we have the first issue in this, which is Man of Steel issue 50, Triangle number 43. I do wonder if Adventures of Superman 528, the weird alien one I just mentioned, is actually a prologue for this arc, as in whether the unnamed alien in that is the one that left the beacon under the river that this issue actually begins with. Anyway, that's just me musing. Next up, we have Superman 106. So this reintroduces, briefly, the character of Massacre, if you remember Massacre in Metropolis. Subsequently, we have Adventures of Superman 529. It's worth noting that whilst Superboy references the events of Underworld Unleashed 2, you don't need to read that. And it's also worth noting that this establishes that the Eradicator is alive and well and part of the Outsiders. Next issue is Action Comics 716. Then Man of Steel 51. Man of Steel 51 is a story about a sky pirate called Freelance and is just such a weird story. Then we have Superman 107. Note that this issue starts with a reference to the death of Darkseid, which has actually happened off screen at this point in the New God series. We don't need to follow that up here, so please relax when you hear about that. This also contains another reference to the events of Underworld Unleashed. After that, we then have Adventures of Superman 530. Now, this has Underworld Unleashed branding, but Underworld Unleashed is only mentioned in passing, and as such, it's an extremely rare example of dual branding on the cover of a comic. It's branded both to Underworld Unleashed and Trial of Superman. I say that actually, the next issue we need to read is Man of Tomorrow 3, and that actually also has dual branding on the cover as well. But trust me, it's a very rare thing to have. And Man of Tomorrow issue 3 actually has Neron turn up, so it's very, very explicitly tied into the Underworld Unleashed event. That then takes us back to Action Comics. 717 is the next issue that we need to read there. Keep in mind, this is Triangle number 1, because the triangle numbering has reset, and it also contains a non-essential reference to the 1995 Action Comics Year 1 Annual. You don't have to read that, and as I've said many times, I've got a reading list and guide to that on my channel. After reading Action 717, we've got Man of Steel 52, then we've got Superman 108, and the trial of Superman finally ends with branding saying, the trial is over. And that's Adventure of Superman 531, triangle number 4. So there we go. Again, hopefully all these bits of note text are really useful or helpful when you're going through the sheet. And like I say, you can always download that as well. So hopefully that was helpful. Next time round, we are going to be looking at what's been going on Earth during the trial of Superman. So we're going to be discussing the Underworld Unleashed DC event. And there we have it. In case you're interested in knowing where these resources are, so the guides, the maps, and so on, they're all available on my website. They're all available for free. You can go into the website, which is nogodsorkings.com, and download the Google Sheet for the Superman reading order, or you can go on the website and look at these reading maps for all the various DC events and a whole bunch of other things I've got on there to your heart's desire. If, however, you are interested in a written version of this guide, then it is available on Amazon. I've recently just self-published it. It is the cheapest possible tier you can get on Amazon. So it's 79 pence UK, 99 cents American, and so on. It's free if you're on Kindle Unlimited, and there is a free sample on the website as well. The reason I put this onto Amazon is kind of a proof of concept. I'm interested to see if people are interested in the written guides, whether or not people want to pick them up. And also it's a good way for me to bat off all the people that are going to be in the comments asking for a Batman guide. If you want a Batman guide, I don't really particularly have any interest in doing one, but I will do one if this book gets 500 reviews. So if this book gets 500 5-star reviews, then I will start doing a Batman reading guide at some point. I don't think that's going to happen, but there we are. Of course, feel free to support the channel by picking this up. Of course, like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, the best way to support the channel is by picking up one of my other books, which isn't a non-fiction reading guide. It's actually a fictional, completely original superhero story. It's prose, so not a comic or words, but it's about superheroes in just a really interesting kind of post-apocalyptic dystopic idea. The first 4 books of the series are out, and if you want to support, please pick that up. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay classy.